Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the Vidalia Onion Educational Conference today as part of the 2021 Virtual Southeast Regional Fruit and Vegetable Conference. I'm Chris Tyson. I'm the Vidalia Onion Agent with UGA Extension, and I'm going to be your moderator today. I have a few housekeeping items to go over before we get started. The first thing, pesticide credits and CCA credits. They're available for most presentations offered during the live regional conference today. Please check the Pesticide CEU guide for a list of approved presentations and participating states. Now, the Pesticide CEU guide is located in the Event Resources tab under the Media player. The guide is also available at the Resource Center located on the main menu of the conference platform. Now, please note, pesticide credits will only be available for registered attendees and only during the live conference. Credits will not be available for on-demand viewing. Now, there's a simple process to do this. The first thing you need to do is go to the audience chat box located on the left side of your screen and type your first name, last name, and the state for which you need credit. Again, go to the audience chat box located on the left side of your screen and type your first name, last name, and the states in which you need credit. You'll need to do this for every presentation to request CEU credits. The next step is to sign out at the end of every presentation. To sign out, simply go to the audience chat box and type your first name, last name, and the states for which you need credit. And we'll also remind you to sign out at the end of this presentation this morning. The third step is to complete the pesticide CEU registration. You only have to complete this registration one time during the conference. It's not required for every presentation. So to access the pesticide CEU registration web link, open the pesticide CEU guide on the Event Resources tab located under the Media player. The pesticide CEU registration web link is located on the front cover of the guide. So this presentation is pre-recorded to reduce technical difficulties. We will be answering your questions live at the end of the presentation, however. And you can submit a question at any point during the presentation by typing your question in the question box and pressing send. Don't forget to thank our 2021 conference sponsors and exhibitors by visiting the virtual trade show and the featured products pavilion. And lastly, don't forget to join us each morning for coffee chats and each evening for networking. And check the full conference agenda for all the details. So we're ready to begin this presentation. I'll go ahead and introduce our speaker. Today we have Dr. Camila Rodrigues with the Department of Food Science and Technology at the University of Georgia. And she's going to give us an update today on Salmonella in onions. And this is not something in the Vidalia industry that we've had to deal with, but I think it is an important topic that we need to discuss. And there have been some other onion growing areas in the United States that have had to deal with Salmonella outbreaks in onions. So the Vidalia onion industry, we want to stay ahead of the curve. We want to keep Vidalia onions the highest quality and safe product as we can. And so we feel it's important to give you an update on that today. So I will turn it over to Dr. Rodrigues and you can hear her presentation. Thanks for joining us today.
Hello, everyone. My name is Camila Rodrigues. I'm a postdoctoral research associated Department of Food Science and Technology. And today I'll be talking about update on Salmonella for onions. I'll be highlighting some major topics on the current outbreak that happened last year and some potential source of contamination and how to prevent future outbreaks. Foodborne illnesses are common yet preventable public health concern, and it represents a huge economic burden. And from those outbreaks that yearly happen in the United States, nearly half of those are linked to fresh produce, in which 25% is linked to leafy greens and 25% to sprouts, and the other half it's linked to tomatoes, peppers, and cantaloupes, melons, and other commodities. But you can tell me, oh, the commodity that I grow has never been related to any outbreak before. For example, I grow carrots. So have you ever heard about an outbreak related to carrots? Or I grow citrus. There's never been an outbreak related to citrus unless for juice, but not for the whole fruit. What about onions? Have you ever heard about an outbreak related to onions before? Not until last year. So last year, there was the outbreak of Salmonella Newport infections linked to onions, in which a total of 1,127 people became infected with this Salmonella Newport strain. And it was reported from 48 states. Illnesses started on date ranging from June to September, in which 167 people were hospitalized. Fortunately, there was no death related to this outbreak. And most of the illnesses reported were concentrated in the west coast of the United States. Also, some cases were identified in Canada in which onions were consumed as well. So we no doubt this outbreak was one of the largest outbreaks linked to fresh produce that happened in the past years in the United States. So this is pretty concerned because so far nobody ever thought about an outbreak related to onions or those kind of commodities. And then suddenly a huge outbreak happened with a lot of cases and identified cases throughout the whole country. So that gives us a idea that we have to think broader. We have to think that all commodities of fresh produce are likely to get contaminated. So for this outbreak, red onions from Thompson International Inc. were likely the source of the outbreak. However, white, yellow, and sweet yellow onions were likely contaminated with the same strain of bacteria, especially because they were processed, they were produced, and they were grown in the same field and then processed in the same packing house. In August 2020, after the cases started coming up, Thompson International and other companies recalled all onions, not only red onions, but they recalled all the white, yellow, and sweet onion. And in September, the FDA declared the outbreak that was over. The recorded cases were not being followed after September. FDA has completed over 2,000 product and environmental analysis from multiple locations and surrounding areas, which include water, soil, and scat samples. Although a variety of generic strains of the Salmonella Newport have been detected, as well as multiple other Salmonella serotypes, a genetic matching to the outbreak strain has yet to be identified in any of those samples collected. So the FDA is still investigating the outbreak and then potentially the source of the contamination. So they're collecting a lot of samples and then they're doing a in-depth investigation to try to figure out what happened and why this huge outbreak happened last year. So the thought about onions being immune to contamination came from these natural antimicrobials that are in onions, also in garlic and other cruciferous, especially onions that feature a variety of sulfur-containing compounds they have this antibacterial, antimicrobial activity, such as the isoaline that are present in onions. So the first thought was that these sulfur-containing compounds would suppress and prevent bacterial or microbial growth, and then consequently would prevent them from becoming contaminated and causing illnesses. So this massive Salmonella outbreak linked to onions that happened last year came to show that all commodities are prone to becoming contaminated with microorganisms, including those ones that have been thought that were immune due to the presence of some bioactive compounds that have antimicrobial activities, such as onions, garlic, and other commodities. So as I mentioned before, the FDA is still investigating the potential sources of contamination for this outbreak. They still don't know yet, but I'm gonna point it out here, some of the potential sources of contamination and what could have happened that could lead to this huge contamination during production, during harvesting, or during processing as well. So irrigation water, or any water that is used for production, is a high risk for contaminating the produce, especially onions. They're underground, so regardless of the irrigation system that they're using, overhead or drip, the water, if the water is contaminated, the water will likely contaminate the onions as well. So it's different if you're using drip irrigation to irrigate tomatoes. So water will not likely touch tomatoes that are above ground. In this case, it doesn't matter. Water will contact the onions. And anything can contaminate the water, so it's an open environment. So you have surface water mostly used here for irrigation. So manure that is stacked around, so runoff, heavy rain that can carry on pathogens, and wildlife, animals around those ponds can also contaminate the water, and the water, if used for irrigation, can contaminate the onions as well. So biological soil amendments of animal origin or manure, they can also contaminate onions if they're directly applied on the produced field. So especially in this case, as I mentioned, onions are underground. So if manure is incorporated into the soil, if it is contaminated, so if it's not treated, so if you're using raw manure and not following the safe time interval application, or if you're not using proper treatment to treat that manure, they can likely pose a huge threat to produce safety. Also, as I said, animals around produce area can also become a potential source of contamination, especially wildlife that you don't have control of it, and then animals can be walking around and then contaminating the water, contaminating the soil. Also, livestock, if you have livestock close to your irrigation ponds or close to your production field, there might be a huge source of contamination on your area. So during harvesting and transportation, contamination can also happen during these two steps. So the harvest crew, they have to understand and then have to know how to safely harvest and store and transport onions. There can be a huge source of cross-contamination if they're not washing their hands, they are not using proper clothes, clean clothes, and don't know that they don't have enough knowledge about good agricultural practices and how to safely harvest produce. Also, tools and equipment that are used during harvest, they can also harbor pathogens. So they have to make sure that those beans or their plastic bags are clean and then they're well sanitized, so they're not potentially carry any pathogen that can be transferred to the produce during harvesting. So also transportation vehicles. So in this case, onions are being transported on these sacks and these bags, but if a lot of growers do not use it, they transport them loose. So you have to make sure that the back of these trucks, these transportation vehicles are well and then properly sanitized, especially if you have animals in the farm and then you transport both. So you have to make sure that while you're transporting animals and then produce, you do cleaning and sanitizing between the two commodities. So you also prevent cross-contamination. So in the packing house during processing, curing can also be a potential source of contamination, especially if those bins and containers are not properly sanitized and cleaned. Also, cleaning and sanitation of the facility and grading lines is a potential source of contamination, especially those areas that onions are directly contacting their surfaces. So water here in the packing line, even though onions are not dumped in the water and are not being used to wash onions, they can be likely a source of contamination if you're using them for cleaning equipment, tools, and the packing line. Lastly, during storage, there are a lot of potential routes of contamination if containers are not well cleaned, if the refrigeration is not kept in the right temperature, or if there are leakings from the roof, or there any debris falling from the roof into the produce, or also if there are pests around. So there are a lot of potential threats that can be increasing the risks of onions contamination during storage. So to minimize those risks of contamination, I'm going to point out some practices that can prevent contamination. So overall, following good agricultural practices and the requirements for the FSMA produce safety rule are key to maintaining and to preventing and minimizing produce contamination and future outbreaks. So first, monitor microbial water quality. So you have to make sure that you're using for production, harvesting, and post-harvesting a good quality of water. So you have to monitor some regular testing and make sure that this water is not contaminated and then the microbial load is not out of the range for pre-harvest water and then free from pathogenic bacteria or from generic E. coli for post-harvesting. Then avoid using raw manure on produced food. You know, raw manure can harbor a lot of pathogens and they can be transferred to the produce when applied to the soil. So make sure that you're using properly treated manure. So when I say properly treated manure, is that those treatments that are scientifically validated, not just stockpiling and saying that there was compost. So you have to make sure that manure treatment it's being properly treated. Also prevent animals around produced food. We know that avoiding and preventing especially wild animals in the food it's really hard work, but try to make your best to prevent and to minimize animal intrusion in the food. So this way you can minimize risks of contaminating the produce. Staff training is extremely important. So your staffing, that especially harvesting crew, they have to make sure that they're well trained and they know how to safely apply manure in the soil, how safely harvest and handle onions and other commodities in the packing house. Cleaning and sanitation of vehicles, facilities, and equipment. So several approaches can be used in dry packing to minimize the effect of cleaning procedures, which include controlled wet cleaning and dry cleaning methods. So if you're using water to clean equipment or the packing line or in the facility, make sure that the water is all dumped and then all dried out before applying sanitizer. So avoid standing water around. And also there are a lot of other dry cleaning procedures that can be used, dry blast and then other type of brushing, sweeping, that can minimize the use of water and also minimize the risks of contamination through the water, the standing water. Segregate tools that are used for cleaning of grading line and tools that are used to clean bathroom and other areas. So make sure that your staff know which tools are and which equipment are used for each designated area. And lastly, but not least important, record keeping and documentation. So keep your records and document everything that is done on your facility during production, during harvesting, and during processing. So that way you can trace back everything, any occurrence, anything that happened, and you can make sure that the approach was done properly and you were able to fix or to address those problems quickly and in the proper way. So as being said, my take-home message here is that establishing suitable good agricultural practices and appropriate food safety measures are effective steps toward minimizing risks and preventing future outbreaks. So again, for this outbreak, the source has not been identified, and then it might not be ever identified because going back, sometimes it's pretty difficult to identify where the contamination happened. So the key is to prevent. So you have to take measures to prevent this from happening in the future. So do follow good agricultural practices and food safety measures so you can prevent this from happening in the future. And if you were interested on taking the produce safety rule training, which is required for fresh produce growers, which include onions, we will be hosting a PSA training on January 26th and then 27th. We are still doing online. We split it in 2 days, so we will be from 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. You can register for this training at Georgia Department of Ag and the Farm Food Safety page, or you can also contact Maggie Brown. She's the Food Safety Education and Outreach Coordinator. And you can also contact me or Laurel Dunn. We are very happy to assist you and if you are interested on taking this course. And again, if you have any further question or if you are interested in knowing a little bit about my work here or what we do around, so don't hesitate to ask me. My email here. Please contact me. And thank you all for your time and your patience here.